we share these streets.
True tales
of everyday folk
in bygone Nottingham.
Oh my God.
Episode 19. Nottingham, City of Caves. There's a massive tunnel that goes from under a pub in Canning Circus all the way to the Goose Fair roundabout.
Bloody Nora.
There used to be a whole city underneath Nottingham, and I heard the people underground didn't get on with the people above ground.
Oh my days.
The cellar in my granddad's old house was actually a cave that connected with the general cemetery.
OMG!
The earliest reference we have to caves in Nottingham dates to around the year 893, when King Alfred the Great's chronicler described Nottingham as Tigwar Cobbock in the book The Life of Alfred. Tigwar Cobbock is an archaic Welsh descriptive term thought to mean house of caves. The earliest caves could have been created during the Viking occupation of Nottingham in 868, but we cannot be certain. It is possible that they were carved into low cliff faces and rock outcrops rather than being dug down into the sandstone. The earliest caves could have been on Fishergate or possibly Hollowstone. Unfortunately, caves dating back to the 9th century have not been identified. They may have been destroyed, modified or enlarged so much that they can't be identified, or have yet to be discovered. The two earliest known surviving caves date to the mid-13th century. One of these is located beneath a property on Castlegate, and the other is the Tannery Cave within the City of Caves attraction. Tanning, the production of leather, was an extremely unpleasant process which used urine and faeces, and so it would have been extremely noxious. It would seem unwise to do this within a cave, but the City of Caves tannery would actually have looked out over broad marsh with an opening in the cliff face, so there would have been some ventilation. Being in a cave also overcomes problems arising from changing weather, which was an issue by the riverside where other tanneries were based.
Nottingham is unusual for the number of caves and their varied uses. Original uses included storage cellars, beer cellars, wine cellars, tanneries, malt kiln complexes, passages, hermitages, jail cells, air raid shelters, garages, workshops and catacombs. Secondary functions are more numerous. Cave building did occur elsewhere. Within Nottinghamshire there are man-made caves in Mansfield and Welbeck, with caves carved into the same sandstone found in Nottingham. Man-made caves also exist in other parts of the country, including Kinver Edge, Stockport, Bristol and Dover. But in these locations, caves appear in small numbers compared to Nottingham.
The sandstone in which the caves are carved forms the bedrock of large parts of the city, and so caves are found beneath properties on all streets of the city centre, as well as beneath properties in the Park, St Anne's, Sneinton, and properties along main roads leading to the city centre, like Mansfield Road, Ilkeston Road, Alfreton Road and Derby Road. There are a small number of caves in Old Basford, and there are quite a lot in Radford. Caves extend beyond the city boundary, particularly in Arnold. There are no caves southwards of Castle Boulevard and Canal Street. It is likely a large number of caves have been destroyed in the city centre, particularly during the 19th century as the lace industry and the Great Central Railway expanded. Some large areas of the city centre have no caves noted within them, but they are almost certain to have had caves at one time. One example is Stony Street, where only a few caves are recorded, despite the street being an important route through the English borough before and after the Norman conquest. The absence of caves there is notable, and it's likely that when the lace warehouses on Stony Street were built, some early and important caves were destroyed or their access points blocked. In 1938, during the construction of Grosvenor House on Friar Lane, a cave chamber containing large numbers of human bones was found. From the description of the cave, it appears to have been medieval in date. Unfortunately, it seems to have been destroyed or at least made inaccessible. This is a huge loss to our understanding of death in the medieval period. It is a mystery as to why a cave at that location had so much human bone within it. It lay outside the Carmelite friary and there were no church burial grounds in the immediate vicinity. It could be that with the huge loss of life arising from the frequent outbreaks of plague around 1350 to 1667, as well as epidemics of other infectious disease, there would have been a need for additional ground to bury the dead and that some caves were used. The Friar Lane crypt could have been one such cave.
As well as caves that were dug to form permanent structures, others were created by sand mining. There are 5 or 6 caves known to have been formed from sand mines, and these all existed on Mansfield Road. The geology in that part of the city is different to the rest, with the sandstone being finer and with fewer pebbles. In an 1815 book, author John Blackner stated that sand was used by good housewives to sprinkle on their floors. Sand could trap a sticky mess and soak up spillages, be swept away and then easily replaced. The quantity of sand extracted from Nottingham mines, though, suggests a much more industrial use. It's possible the sand was used locally for making glass. Before Victoria Station, Glasshouse Street connected with Mansfield Road, and the name is suggestive of a glass manufactory. With the incline, it's easy to imagine carts of sand being rolled down to the old junction with Glasshouse Street to be used in production.
The most expansive sand mine is part of the excellent Peel Street cave tour. The tour starts at a doorway that looks as though it could lead down to a nuclear bunker, and when you emerge at the end of the tour it's from beneath a property on Mansfield Road. Local man James Rouse worked at this sand mine for around 30 years. James was buried on the 31st of December 1813, aged 70, having lived at St Nicholas Workhouse since quitting sand mining a few years earlier. As well as glass, sand would be required for construction too. The sand mines date to the 18th and early 19th centuries, at a time when Nottingham was expanding and there were a growing number of brickworks in the city. It is likely the sand from the mines would have been important in producing bricks and mortar. There were sand quarries elsewhere in the city, such as in Bulwell, but the sand mines would have helped with the huge quantity of construction at the time. Only a small proportion of the Nottingham sand would have been used for sprinkling on floors. The borough records in 1783 indicate that the mayor was requested to view the rock holes near Gallows Hill because of their dangerous condition due to sand mining. It is probable that the sand mines viewed in 1783 included caves at Rock Cemetery. In 1806 the mayor was contacted regarding the dangerous state of the sand rocks on the forest, with particular reference to Edward Hughes, who was killed by a falling rock in one of the sand mines on Gallows Hill. It was noted that
the excavations in these rocks have been extended so far horizontally underneath the surface of the ground, and in so unguarded a manner, as to cause the whole body of the rock to be in danger of falling, and to render many of the cavities almost imminently alarming.
It was recommended that the excavations be immediately stopped and that the rock holes be blown up with gunpowder, with the sand getters in future levelling the rock. The corporation gave the mayor the authority to take steps for completely removing the very dangerous nuisances. Most of the sand mine was destroyed, but a small amount still survives because in 1806 one of the windmills of the forest stood above it, and so that part could not be blown up. Some of the workers providing the muscle for rock working and sand mining seem to have come from Nottingham workhouses. There is a substantial cave system at the site of the former Union Workhouse on York Street. The cave system was formed in the 18th century and then enlarged by the Nottingham Brewery in the 19th century. There were a number of sand mines in the immediate area, and it is possible that workhouse inmates were somehow involved in the mining. Perhaps the workhouse was paid for supplying workers. On 18th of September 1861, the Nottingham Board of Guardians discussed 2 paupers who were refusing to work in the rock holes. The men, John and James Oakland, were aged over 60 and said they did not have the strength to carry out the work. Mr. Loverseed of the Nottingham Union said all men should be required to work, although at the time the law stated that men aged over 60 should not be compelled to work. Loverseed argued that making them work prevented them from taking up vices such as the playing of dominoes and draughts. Thank heavens, dominoes and draughts are now largely forgotten and modern society is free from vice. On the 7th of March 1862, the Nottinghamshire Guardian reported that the Board of Guardians said that there were men working in the rock holes for the benefit of Church Cemetery, Rock Cemetery, and that there was a great objection to this. The article suggests that they were extracting soil from the holes, but they were cut into the rock, so it seems more likely they were extracting sand. Lots of caves are very similar in style, so it's possible that by the 18th century there were dedicated cave carvers. There are two very elaborate cave systems in the park, which we know were both carved by a stonemason named William Jennison of New Lenton. These properties have carved figures including biblical characters and animals, a fine staircase said to be identical in form to a staircase at Haddon Hall, and other impressive features. One of the caves has carved historical figures including Nelson, Napoleon Bonaparte, Jesus, William Gladstone, and a carving of the cave owner himself. Earlier caves were likely carved by stonemasons because they had the skills and expertise to carry out this work. When you look at the details of some known medieval pillar caves, the level of skill is apparent and the pillars bear some resemblance to those in medieval churches. By the late medieval period, however, the level of attention to detail significantly declines, and while there are some high-quality caves of the late medieval and early post-medieval periods, there is a sense that an increasing number of caves were almost DIY projects, or at least created by less skilled individuals. The site of the former Forest Brewery at 302 to 316 Alfreton Road has a cave system which was hewn soon after 7th of November 1885. On that date, an advertisement requested tenders for rock cellar cutters. The brewery was established in 1885. An auction advertisement for the brewery, dated 31st of March 1888, refers to the caves as
an extensive range of cellarage cut out of the sandstone rock runs under nearly the whole of this lot, and a well of good depth affords an ample supply of water for refrigerating purposes.
One of the great myths of Nottingham's caves is there is a network of interconnected tunnels under the city. Although a wonderful idea, there is zero evidence for such a thing. However, that's not to say that such an idea has never been proposed. George Campion was an amateur archaeologist who undertook lots of excavations of caves and other sites, including the Broxtowe Iron Age fort and Roman campsite in the 1930s and 1940s. In 1937 he was director of the Thoroton Society Excavation Section. In the lead-up to the Second World War, he campaigned for huge underground settlements to be created, so that the entire population of Nottingham could live underground for long periods of time in order to escape the risks from air raids. He felt the existing caves were inadequate for underground settlements and proposed the creation of 5 new cave systems built within areas of rising topography around the city. The passages would total approximately 40 miles in length and contain ventilation, electric lighting and water supplies at central wells. He again campaigned for this at the start of the Cold War in 1949, this time allowing for subterranean community centres, cafes, bathrooms and lavatories. This would have involved creating lots of new tunnels and led to lots of existing caves being joined together and others destroyed. The council never gave any real consideration to Campion's ideas. In the recent past, an architect speculated that lots of the city centre caves could be joined and adapted to accommodate an underground roller coaster. Others have suggested linking some of the Broadmarsh caves to the other cave systems nearby, but this would result in the loss of nationally important historical features of the caves. The nearest we have to a cave complex is at Castle Rock, where some of the caves were connected to one another in the 1950s to facilitate tours.
Another commonly held myth involves walking many miles in a single tunnel. One persistent tale tells of a tunnel connecting Castle Rock with Bridlesmith Gate, and another of an elaborate subterranean route between Player's old factory in Radford and Rock Cemetery, complete with pavements, steps and street lighting. These are often the results of misremembered real events or real occurrences that have been made more elaborate over numerous retellings. Several years ago, two elderly men reported that they used to play in a cave in the 1940s. They described how it went into a cliff and extended approximately 2 miles. They provided very specific location information, so it was investigated and found to have been a Second World War air raid shelter made out of brick, which was approximately 80 metres or 0.04 miles in length. On Peel Street cave tours, attendees are often asked how far they think they've walked, and they generally significantly overestimate. The cave system at Peel Street is approximately 150 metres in length, but because of the winding nature of the passages and people's unfamiliarity with the route, they often believe they've walked for approximately a mile. 150 metres is 0.09 miles. A person who was lost in a cave such as Peel Street could end up walking around the same passages, going round in circles, and think they had walked several miles before they found their way out.
The caves seemed to ignite people's imaginations. Staff at a city centre pub claim that at one time all of Nottingham's caves were joined together, and that it was only in modern times that bedrock was inserted to block off the former access routes. They asserted the caves were used during the medieval period to transport goods and men from London to Nottingham, and stated that they've seen archived documents proving this. A few months ago, an individual claimed to have found extensive caves beneath the city which no one else was aware of. Inside those caves were allegedly 50,000 skeletons dating back to the Black Death.
Everyone loves a good story, but it's always worth fact-checking any you hear. The population of Nottingham was only around 4,000 at the start of the Black Death, so the figure mentioned in the last story was greatly overestimated. Unless, of course, we brought skeletons through the tunnels into Nottingham from London. Yep, that'll definitely be what it is.
Joking aside, we all love to believe in myths. They suggest the world's a more interesting place than we adults have found it to be, and give us a sense of childlike wonder that you don't often feel while paying your gas bill or saving a spreadsheet at your desk job. The myth of the tunnel leading from Bridlesmith Gate to the castle is so prominently told it was featured in a national newspaper and has been passed down the generations. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that you find yourself reluctantly contradicting when you're an armchair historian.
The only cave known to have been created for living in is that on Castle Boulevard, known as Lenton Hermitage. During the medieval period it was known as St Mary de la Roche, or St Mary of the Rock, and was occupied by 2 monks who were paid to give divine service. It's mentioned in royal records dating back to 1239. A record dating back to the time of Henry III states that £6, 1 shilling and 6pence was paid to 2 monks ministering in the chapel of St Mary la Roche. In 1474, King Edward acquired lands from the prior of Lenton, with a monk to say mass in the chapel.
Sneinton Hermitage is of likely late medieval date and appears to have been lived in that time. The hermitage was first referred to in 1544 in a rental document that states,
"There is a house under the ground in a roche of stone that sometime was called the Hermitage."
A later rental of 1591 refers to the
Hermitage in Sneinton being a house cut out of rock and payeth yearly 2 shillings.
Houses were later built up against the hermitage with people occupying some of the cave chambers. Some caves were inhabited during the post-medieval period, but this is unlikely to have been their original use. For example, in 1607, caves on Holystone were blocked to prevent them from being inhabited. There is some documentary evidence that people did live in caves originally created as cellars. An anonymous author writing in 1870 said, "If a man is poor, he only had to go to Nottingham with a mattock, a shovel, a crow, an iron, a chisel, or a mallet, and with such instruments he may play mole and work himself a hole or burrow for his family." We do not know how many people lived in caves at this time. It was illegal for people to do so by 1870, but we can surmise that some people probably did. It is possible that if a property owner could make money out of leasing their cave, or rock hole as they were often known, and there were people willing to pay a small amount of money who could not afford better lodgings, then they would live in a cave. Some would have occupied caves if they had access to them and were homeless, in the same way that homeless people today sleep in a number of the city's caves. Nottingham's caves can be explored to some extent. When the world isn't gripped by a pandemic, tours are operated around the Peel Street Cave Complex. We'll put a link in the show notes where you can find out more. The City of Caves attraction, formerly accessed via Broadmarsh Centre, is open and now accessed from Garner's Hill near the new Nottingham College building, and both are highly recommended.
The caves make Nottingham unique. Other locations around the globe have crevices and catacombs, but few have an environment which has sparked the interaction with its inhabitants as much as Nottingham. There could be many more caves dotted around us.
The myths and tall stories will continue, and long may they do so. If you live close to the city centre, maybe there used to be a cave under your home. Maybe there's an old luggage trunk with faded initials and forgotten personal possessions inside. Maybe one day you might change the carpet in the front room and find that uneven bit of floor is actually a trapdoor into a forgotten part of your house. If you work in a city centre office, have a think about that heavy door in the basement behind the filing cabinets. Isn't Castle Rock in that direction? And isn't there a story about a lost tunnel to the castle that's meant to appear somewhere around here?